The pace of industrial growth in Russia before the First World War produced a heady overconfidence among its ruling classes. The disastrous conflict with Japan just under a decade before was forgotten. The war party in St. Petersburg became more vociferous, demanding an attack on Turkey after it closed the Dardanelles in 1912. Even the formerly cautious foreign minister Sergei Sazonov was outraged at the way Russia had been treated by the German and Austro-Hungarian empires over the First Balkan War. So, when Vienna issued its ultimatum to Serbia, following the assassination in June 1914 of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, Sazonov asked the chief of the General Staff to prepare the army for war. He told the Tsar that if Russia failed to support its fellow Slavs in Serbia, it would constitute a fatal humiliation. Nicholas II felt obliged to concede to the calls for the first stage of partial mobilization, but then army commanders insisted that if Russia mobilized against the Austro-Hungarian armies, Russian forces would have to mobilize all along the central and northern fronts against the Germans. The imperial family's counselor and faith healer, Grigory Rasputin, was absent from the capital. That fateful summer, he had returned home to Siberia, where he received news of the rush to war in a telegram from the Tsarina. He set out immediately to send a reply to advise the Tsar to resist the pressure, but a peasant woman waylaid him, stabbing him in the stomach. She was a follower of Ilyador, a former priest who had turned against him, denouncing him as a lecher and a false prophet. Rasputin nearly died and was incapacitated in hospital. When he regained consciousness and heard that mobilization had been ordered, he insisted on sending the telegram which warned that war would destroy both Russia and the Romanovs. This final chance of persuading the Tsar to stand up against the belligerents all around him arrived too late, but it would probably have made little difference. The fear of the Russian General Staff that the Central Powers could mobilize more rapidly was not the main factor in the escalation to war. That had come from the Austrian determination to crush Serbia before the major European powers could step in. Germany refused to stop them. General Helmut von Moltke, the chief of the German General Staff, even urged the Austrians to ignore any plea for moderation from his own government and push on with their attack. Diplomacy and royal connections stood little chance. War was indeed too important to be left to the generals, as the French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau was soon to observe. Once war had been declared, things could only go from bad to worse for the grey mass of Russian peasant soldiers. Altogether, 15,300,000 men would be called up into the army and navy. After the defeat at the Battle of Tannenberg, and then the infamous Great Retreat in 1915, following the German victory of Gorlice Tarnów, just southeast of Krakow, bitterness and suspicion of treason at court set in among officers as well as soldiers. Talk of the German stranglehold soon began, partly because so many generals had names of Teutonic or Scandinavian origin. But most cursed the German Tsarina and her Camarilla, dominated by their éminence grise, Rasputin. The dissolute monk interfered with shameless corruption in appointments once the Tsar unwisely decided to assume the supreme command of the armies at the Stavka, the supreme headquarters in Mogilev. Trench life for Russian soldiers along the whole front, running through the Baltic provinces, Poland, Belarus, Galicia, and Romania, was an inhuman experience. Having dug themselves into the ground, wrote Maxim Gorky, they live in rain and snow, in filth, in cramped conditions. They are being worn out by disease and eaten by vermin. They live like beasts.